Okay, now we're going to talk about interviews. Now, hopefully when you looked at the storyboard tutorial and saw my Rate Your A example, you were able to imagine how that documentary would look. Part of that documentary, the key to that documentary, is the storytelling, and that was the interviews. The story you're wanting to tell comes through in the interviews. There's two ways you can try and tell your story. One is through a narrator talking over your footage and telling your story that way, or through the use of interviews, where you're teasing the information out of the people you're interviewing and using that to tell the story from their perspective, from the community's perspective. So what I have here is what I'm going to put up here in Spanish, is just an example, using the Rate Your A garden example as something, a PDF I've sent to Ronald. Hopefully he will have shared that with you either through a hard copy on paper or through email, whichever way COVID permits. So I'll run through this. You'll see what I'm talking about will be highlighted on the screen here beside me. And then we'll discuss a little bit about the Dave and John interview, and we'll look at that to show you the do's and don'ts of good interview techniques from my perspective as an editor. So the Rate Your A garden project example. So the first question you need to do is come up with your story, right? That's you guys sit down, work out what story you want to tell. Then you do your storyboard, and that illustrates generally what you want your story to look like. Then you do the interviews. That way you will know what questions to ask the people you're interviewing. Now, who do you want to interview? That's a good question to ask. So, who will you interview? Why these particular people? And then the questions to ask them. So, you want to interview the person who had the original idea or a member of any committee in the community who made the decision on the community garden. Whoever you interview, ensure that they know all the relevant information for answering your questions. Members of the community who helped build, tend and harvest the garden. You will then want to interview the teachers, elders who passed on their knowledge of the plants, the preparation of the produce from the garden and the cooking of the produce. And then members of the community had no part in any of the project, but took part in the final community meal of the produce. Now, why do you want to interview these people? Well, the person or persons who had the original idea will know why they wanted to create the garden, the purpose it was to serve, and the hope for outcomes. And this comes back to the conflict issue, the problems versus the solutions. That grabs the attention of the audience. Because remember, your story is for the audience. You know the story. You need to tell them the story and make sure they understand it. So now the members of the community who helped build, tend, harvest the garden will know of the joy that came from helping in this, the problems they faced, the way they overcame these problems, unforeseen circumstances and how they were dealt with, the final results and the potential for continuing this idea. The teachers, elders who passed on their knowledge of tending, planting, preparation and the type of plants, the cooking of the produce, will tell you where they learned these skills themselves, the problems they faced passing this knowledge on, and how they overcame this, and their hopes for the future of this knowledge. Who will pass this knowledge on to the next generation? Who will pass it on to the next generation? Will it be saved digitally to be used in schools? Who knows? That's something you have to think about for the future. Then, the members of the community who took no part in the garden project can tell you when they knew of the project, their hopes, fears, joy, disappointments, and hopefully, the fabulous outcome of the project, and if they would take part in another such project again. That's just the way I would have done the Rate Your A garden example. That's the questions, the people I would want to interview to try and get an all-round view of the project, to tell the story. Then we have some example questions, which I'll put up here, but there's far too many for me to go through individually and explain why. That would be for you to think about, because it would depend on your story, what questions you ask of the people that you're interviewing. So, That's the bakery garden example. Hopefully that will have explained to you the process to go through to tell your story. You could always go with a narrator who's just telling the story over the top. That's up to you guys to decide. We're now going to look at the interview between John and Dave, and I'm going to go through this slowly with you. We'll watch the whole interview first, and then I will just do a voiceover explaining each individual part of it and why I think, as an editor, from my perspective, it's best to do it this way. Okay. Hi Dave, thanks very much for your time. I'm going to ask you a few questions here. First of all, what was your idea? Well, I wanted to give something back to the community, and as I come from a family of bakers, I just thought of a community bakery. So why did you choose a community bakery? Well, the idea was that members of the community would work together in the bakery, producing affordable bread for the whole community. And then as a way of paying the people working in the community, that we would give them the free bread, you know, meat. What did you hope that the bakery would achieve? Well, I wanted the community to have a constant supply of bread. This way nobody would go hungry in the community. What were your biggest fears for the bakery? That no one would want to take part in it, would want to work in the bakery, or think it was a crazy idea from start to finish, you know. And what were the biggest problems that you faced? The biggest problem was the electricity for the ovens and the hot plates. We found the location okay. The community was very happy for us to use the community centre kitchen for our bakery, but it was just powering it. You know, they were very concerned at the cost of their electricity bill to power everything, and how would we pay for that if we were only doing affordable bread. Were you able to solve these problems? Oh yeah, it was amazing. The community really came together over it. There was a girl who was an expert in electrical engineering, and she gave us some great ideas. It wasn't her job, she just knew everything about it. She suggested, first of all, that we have two types of oven. One that's powered by electricity and a hot plate, and one that's powered by wood. So there's a forest nearby that we could go and the community can harvest wood, and we go twice a week as a community, bring the wood back and use that when we don't have electricity. But one of our best ideas was to put a solar panel on the roof of the community centre that powered the bakery, the ovens. And then of course we had the conversation about what happens when the sun isn't shining, when it's cloudy and it's raining, there's not enough electricity to power it. Well, there's a river runs through the village here, and she had the great idea to build a very small dam that wouldn't affect the environment in any way, and put in a small hydroelectric motor. So that way we always have electricity either through the sun, through the hydroelectric, and if neither of those are working, then we've got the wood powered ovens. So that way we can always produce bread for everyone. The folks in the community really came together over this, from the collecting of the wood, like I said earlier, to the preparation and working in the kitchen, and building the dam, fitting the solar panel. It's just been amazing seeing the whole community work together to kind of provide this source of nutrition and electricity for the community centre. Do you think this idea was a success for the community? Oh heavens, yeah, I had a fairly simple idea that the community took beyond what I'd hoped for. They really came together in preparing, building and staffing the bakery, gathering wood, as I talked about earlier, fitting the solar panels, planning and building the dam, fitting the hydroelectric, so the community centre always has access to free electricity all the time now. It really did bring the community together as one, you know, to work together. Would you take part in any future community projects yourself? Oh, most definitely. It was great getting to know people in the community that I normally just say hi to in the passing, but really getting to know them with working together, and learning so much from each other, and where the community is going to go with this. And in fact, we're actually talking to a village further down the river, and they're planning to do something similar. So we're going to go with them and teach them all the problems we faced, all the solutions we had, and they could use the river too for their community centre. Well, thanks very much for your time, Dave. It's been very informative. Oh, no problem. It was great to be able to tell our story. I hope to speak to you very soon. Good luck in the future. Thanks very much. Thanks very much. Talk to you soon. Bye. Now you've watched the interview, you've probably guessed that I recorded them individually. You will have to do that as well yourself, because you'll only have one camera and you will only have one microphone. So this way you can record, I would record the interview first, record Dave answering the questions, using the microphone and the camera. Make sure you have the camera set up so that Dave's looking off to the side. That way you won't get the rabbit in the headlights look, because people really don't like talking to a camera. It's much easier to talk to a person. So don't have them focused on the camera, have them focused on the person who's giving the interview. When you have recorded the interview, then record John, the person asking the questions, the interviewer. That way, if they're slightly differently worded from what you've got written down, then it doesn't matter, because you can listen back to what you asked at the time and then just repeat it. The thing to be careful of is make sure you give the person who's answering the questions, Dave in this case, a list of the questions beforehand, so that they have time to read through them and think about their answers a little bit. It doesn't have to be long, an hour, half an hour, maybe the night before, depends. It just stops them having lots of moments. That's terrible, and it's really difficult to edit this together. It really looks blocky and chunky when you do it that way. Now these are only points if you're plan on showing the person who's asking the questions, John in this case. You might not want to do that. You might just want to have their voice in the background. But I would still record the interview and then use the microphone to record the person asking the questions. That way you get the wording just exactly the same. You may want to just have the questions appear on the screen and then the person answering the questions. That's entirely up to you. But what we're going to do is I'm going to assume that you're going to have someone on screen asking the questions, and then we'll now run through the video of the interview and I will point out through voiceover the do's and don'ts and the things to watch for and the ways to get around any problems that you may have noticed. So now we'll have Dave here giving his interview that you've recorded. You'll see that he's chatting away to the person quite happily, quite easily. These are things that are very important, that the person feels relaxed, you've got a bit of a rapport with them if you're giving the interview, and they can just say what they want to say. Now there's points in this interview where Dave talks about things that you never knew about. He talks about the young girl who had the idea of the solar panels and the wood burning stove and the small hydroelectric motor in the dam. So you would maybe want to interview her. You'd maybe never heard of her, never thought about it before. So these are things that I was talking about before, where you want to maybe be open to developing your story, having it change, being flexible. These things might crop up in an interview that you had no idea was available, so you have to go and interview that person. Now we come to the bit where Dave's chatting and you actually see his bit of paper there. It just comes up and blocks the screen. What you do then is you do something called a cutaway. To cover that up, you would film someone from the side, John nodding in agreement, listening to what he's saying, as you can see here. There's also other times where you maybe want a picture of Dave chatting. What you don't want to do is record it like this, where the window's in the background and you're looking at him, but he's faded out because all you're seeing is the bright light from the window. So you have to be cautious of that, what's in the background. There's also a picture of the other cutaway of Dave here from the side. It doesn't really matter, it doesn't have to tie up exactly with what he's saying at the time. You can record this afterwards or beforehand when the interviewer and the interviewee, so John and Dave, are having a little chat. You're just going to record them. The thing to watch for is you look here, here's a cutaway of John nodding along to what Dave's saying, but you notice he's not wearing his jacket. And then you go back to the interview where he's asking the questions and he is wearing his jacket. These are things to watch for as well. Consistency. Make sure that you're not recording something that isn't the same as what you have before. What you don't want to do is this, where the camera's bouncing backwards and forwards between the two of them. That looks absolutely terrible. So you just want to focus on the person, keep the camera rolling all the time. There's also the point here in the background you have to look at what's lying around. As you can see from what I've done here, you can see the camera casing, a hammer and something else just lying on the floor. These are things to be cautious of when you're doing a filming of a cutaway. You may want to do this where you're looking at both of them at the same time as a cutaway, you know, where they're chatting and then you're going to focus in again. Another thing to watch for is reflections. As you can see from the picture here, you can actually see the person operating the camera and waving and things like that. So these are just wee things to be thinking about while you're recording. So you use cutaways to mask things, to cover things up, to just stop it being the same face all the time. The other way of doing that is overlaying pictures connected to your story with the interview. For instance, going back to when Dave's talking about the hydroelectric dam, you could put a picture or a small video like this overlaying the top of what he's saying. It just saves it all being talking heads, which can be quite boring if you're looking at it. What we're going to do now is we're going to look at John asking the questions. I'll just let it play the raw footage from the beginning, and you will see the gaps and the pauses that he leaves, so that it makes it easier for me as an editor to be able to put them together. You'll notice he says question 2, and then there's gaps in between. He does pause. That gives me a chance as an editor to be able to separate them and put them together. Hi Dave, thanks very much for your time. I'm going to ask you a few questions here. First of all, what was your idea? Question 2. So why did you choose a community bakery? Question 3. So those gaps are quite important for an editor. It gives me a chance to be able to identify which question you're asking, and then gives me a chance to take that piece of the footage out and then edit down so we're just getting the actual question. Now we're going to look at the background of the shot. You notice I've got quite a wide angle here, you can see it. That gives me the opportunity, which I'll show you now, but compare the two. But I can zoom in myself using the software to highlight and get rid of those things. So you've got the electrical socket on the left, the basket of wood on the right. And as you can see, I've been able to zoom those out, get rid of those, and still keep John in the centre of the shot. Well, that about wraps it up for interview techniques. Quite a long one, so we'll do a quick recap. Record your interview first, then record the person asking the questions. Make sure the person's talking to someone, not talking to the camera. Keep an eye out for your background. Watch your reflections. Keep quite a wide angled lens on it. And don't worry, just keep filming. I can always overlay any mistakes, any problems with cutaways. So the cutaways, just at some point I didn't actually mention, that was film them while they're actually chatting. So that if I need to focus in on Dave or John while they're chatting, that I've actually got their lips moving so that it matches up with the sound. It doesn't have to be like synced together, but as long as they're actually talking while I'm using that cutaway, if they're actually talking. So that's about it. Again, any questions, get in touch with Ronald. He'll relay them to me and I'll relay them back to you with through email. Okay, thanks now.